Hi, and thank you for joining me for another video. And friends, today we're going to discuss a very, very important topic. And that topic is what makes someone Jewish. And friends, I would honestly say that this video, in terms of Jewish videos, is the most important video I've made so far. And the reason that this video is so important is because there is no bigger obstacle keeping this world from progressing ethically than the notion of who is or who is not a Jew. And I know that sounds like a bit of a bold statement, but it's true, my friends. The issue on who is and who is not ultimately in God's covenant is what I believe will decide the fate of humanity. And this, again, all from a Torah perspective. In other words, I'm in no way arguing that anyone other than Torah keepers today are Jews, just in case you think I've begun to lose my mind. So, what makes someone Jewish? Okay, the most common answer you will hear today is that if your mother is Jewish, you are Jewish. And groups like Reform have even expanded that to include that if your father is Jewish, you are Jewish. Which would actually surprise you to learn that there's a makor for that in Talmud Yerushalmi. But regardless, what if I told you that they're both wrong? And before I explain my point, I want you to think of modern Jewish culture and what ultimately separates us from the rest of the world today. For example, if someone who happens not to be born of ethnically Jewish parents comes to the conclusion that Torah is true and idolatry is rubbish, why are they still discouraged and shunned from the Jewish community at large? I mean, honestly, at that point, what really separates them from a Torah-believing Israelite in the Bible? That's a very fair question. Well, the first thing that most would probably say is that because their mother was not born Jewish, they are not Jewish unless they go through a halachic conversion process. Okay, fair enough. We'll get back to this area in just a bit. Next, can we define what does being Jewish mean from a biblical perspective? So, we know that a Jew was initially someone from the tribe of Judah, and then later on, after the dispersion of the northern tribes, every Israelite was known as a Jew. And actually, I'm sure you already know that, at least biblically, the term Jew or Israelite did not really mean that someone was in the covenant. In other words, Jew or Israelite was a nationalistic title. Even the New Testament shows Romans referring to anyone native to the region as Jews. And friends, the reason I'm using only Torah right now is so that we could first grab and understand the Pashat and then later systematically put it and tie it all in together halachically. Actually, what the Almighty describes as someone in the covenant or someone keeping the covenant were always only individuals who kept Torah. In other words, if someone did not keep Torah, they were not in the Almighty's covenant. Heck, the Torah was part of the covenant. Again, this is from a Pashat or literal biblical perspective. Because as you know, notions of matrilineal or patrilineal descent in terms of Jewishness were actually developed much later on by Chazal, by the great court, the Sanhedrin. However, friends, that is not what being a Jew means today. A Jew, apart from also describing one of the descendants, the ethnic descendants of Israel, or someone solely born of a Jewish mother, also has come to mean someone who is one of God's chosen or someone in the covenant. In other words, we have combined the nationalistic with the religious aspect of what being a Jew really is. And the problem is that when the majority of the supporters of Jews or even Israel worldwide think of what is a Jew to them, they only really see what the Bible states as a standard. And friends, if this isn't a load of misinformation, I don't know what is. So, friends, everything I'm telling you so far is verifiable fact and not my opinion. So this is probably all new to you. I mean, you're probably thinking, what do you mean? I always heard that the only thing that makes you Jewish is, like we said, having a Jewish mother. And my friends, and all I'm saying is that from a midoraita level, from a Torah perspective, in God's opinion, that, my friends, could not be further from the truth. Actually, having a Jewish parent only makes someone liable from a halachic legal perspective to be judged by rabbinic and Torah law by a Jewish court, and that's all. Again, we must always make a distinction between what was received on Har Sinai and what was later developed by Chazal. I mean, Chazal themselves always made that distinction. I mean, the proper understanding of believing that anything that came to us from Har Sinai, from Mount Sinai, had the actual signature of Hashem on it. And anything developed later by the court still was authoritative, but was not on the same level of what was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, and actually lacked the inspiration of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Not to mention that Chazal were only authorized to establish practice and not belief. But again, we'll cover this later. And like I said, you will probably be surprised to know that even this, the concept of matrilineal descent determining our legal status as citizens of the nation of Israel, was a concept made up by the court, which, like I said, as Torah Jews, we must adhere to under the mitzvah of lo tasur, of obeying and not straying from the decisions of the court. But at the same time, we're required to know the difference between man-made law and Torah. Teaching us what? Teaching us that if someone does not keep Torah, but it has a Jewish mother, this person is no more Jewish or chosen or in the covenant or special to God than a non-Jew who does not keep Torah. Now, is a person with a Jewish mother legally liable in a court setting for not keeping Torah when a non-Jew would not be? Absolutely, but he is not Jewish in the covenant in God's eyes. In other words, today our major problem is that people fail to make a distinction between rabbinic law and Torah law. Mainly because Kabbalah has mystified rabbinic enactments and made amoral, secular Jewish law into divinely inspired Torah law, which has also caused them to make up bigoted notions of intrinsic worth that never existed in the Jewish world before. Ideas like having Jewish blood, or a Jewish soul, or being literally part of God himself, and being chosen or special or in the covenant apart from what we believe or how we behave. So again, what does the Torah consider to be a Jew? Like we said, someone who keeps the commandments, and that's all. So just this so far should really make you look at the world much differently than most Jews look at it today. Also, did you know that the whole conversion process was also created by the court? In other words, it has never been the halachic conversion process that made one Israel. Again, from a spiritual standpoint, which is actually what everyone cares about when choosing Judaism, right? What God thinks. That means that it wasn't your rabbi who makes you Jewish, or how it is said nowadays, who converted you, or even the mikveh waters, but rather you accepting Torah into your life. And this, again, not formally, but when you came to that intellectual conclusion that the Torah was true and the God of Israel was sovereign. I mean, this is the Pashat, like it states in Parashat Re'eh, that the Almighty awaits for us to make that choice, that decision to follow Torah, when he tells Israel that he's placed life and death before them. So friends, if you're out there waiting to convert, made to feel like crap and inferior because you were not born of a Jewish mother, my friends, I'm here to tell you that you are not inferior. Your path may have been, but my friends, you have turned that around and have already entered under the wings of the Shekhinah because of the path that you have chosen. And friends, this is something that many in the Jewish world fail to see. That if as a world we succeed or we fail, we rise or we fall, regardless, we will meet that fate together. And this is something that most rabbis fail to understand today, that we either work together to perfect this world through Torah, or we all lose. And again, I believe in Torah Sheba'al Peh. I believe in the oral law. In other words, as it states in Parashat Shoftim and in other places in Torah, that we have to adhere to the legal instructions of the court. Fine, but we mustn't do and fall into the great sin of calling it divinely inspired. No, friends, only Torah holds that title. And friends, when and only when we begin properly understanding what our Torah commands and what our rabbinic commands, will we finally begin prioritizing our actions properly and finally stop allowing rabbinic legal enactments to shape how we view the rest of the world. Because the gulf is massive between what we're required to do by rabbinic law and how we're supposed to believe and behave to the outside world. In other words, many thought that because the court decided that they would only adjudicate those born of Jewish mothers by rabbinic and Torah law, that those born of Jewish mothers were in some way superior to those who were not. Similar to assuming that those born in the U.S. are intrinsically superior to those born outside of it. Are you beginning to understand the distinction between the types of law? Because, again, the law was rabbinic in origin. In other words, it was made up by the Sanhedrin. Did they have the authority to make it up? Absolutely. But what they do not have the power to do is to change or alter metaphysical reality and decide who is intrinsically pure or who should exclusively be brought close or back to Judaism, which is how it's understood and done today. And worse, who should be excluded and discouraged in terms of non-Jews wanting to convert. And this, my friends, brings us to the notion used by Jews today to discourage non-Jews from reaching higher, and that's the laws of Noah. Again, another set of laws compiled by the Sanhedrin to be able to judge non-Jews living in the land. And that's it. It's rabbinic. In other words, there is no way that a court could ever determine that anyone who kept these set of laws would be given a share in the world to come, at least not from a definitive perspective. They could say it's my personal opinion, and that's it, which is exactly how it's brought down in the Gemara by Chazal, which showed that they even disagreed on this notion, right? It has Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai holding differently on the question that if someone who keeps the Noahide laws will have a share in the world to come. Not to mention that they would have known that their authority only lied within the realm of halakha and not defining metaphysical reality or someone's eternity. And friends, this is the main difference between groups like Dordea and the rest, that we don't tell you what to think, but rather we teach you how to think halachically. We try to introduce the Torah mindset into the modern scholar, which I do not have to tell you is antithetical to the Kabbalistic mindset held by many rabbis today. But regardless, when you understand this, you should really begin viewing the world differently. In other words, not between people who consider themselves Jews nowadays and non-Jews, but between people who keep Torah and people who don't. Because this, from a halachic and even Torah and even metaphysical level, is the only definition of what a Jew really is. Now, again, from a legal sense, the definition is different, but we can't confuse the mundane with the divine. Because one was given to purify our lives and our behavior, and the other was instituted to keep Israel progressing in a uniform manner. And that's it. It's very simple. And friends, one thing you must remember is that only because someone understands rabbinic law in such a manner does not make him or her a Karaite or a denier of the oral law or tradition. But really, it is the opposite. This is the only pure way to understand Torah and Halakha. And it is actually the fault of the Kabbalists who, in an attempt to mystify everything in Judaism, have at the same time deified the rulings of the Great Court as divine. Which is why you see so many supporting the secular state of Israel from a religious perspective, even though it's actually more irreligious than some European countries. Why? Because they have confused a country founded by communist, atheistical Jews as some sort of resurrection of biblical Israel. Again, failing to separate the mundane from what was sanctioned by the divine. So, from a Torah and even a rabbinic perspective, 90% of everyone who is considered Jewish nowadays is not, or in the covenant. As a matter of fact, Christians and even Muslims are more Jewish than any secular Jew could ever be, which is why Jewish outreach efforts should really be directed at them and not how it's done nowadays, believing that only because someone was supposedly born from Jewish parents, they're in some way held accountable by God for not keeping commandments that they themselves never really accepted just because of the blood running through their veins. Which again, from a Torah perspective, this is not the case. Actually, according to the Peshat in the Torah itself, the world is held liable for not keeping the commandments in the Torah, and not just someone who's born from Jewish parents. Now, I understand that the Jewish High Court would only judge those who had Jewish mothers because, again, the purpose of the court was to establish laws for the residents or even citizens within the land. So again, so they can progress and civilize themselves in a unified manner. And that's it. And surely not to add to the ethical instructions within the Torah. But again, please do not miss the purpose of this video, which is to help you differentiate between rabbinic and the divine. So, the next time you see a rabbi separating the world tribally instead of ethically, ask him if he knows the difference between Torah law and belief and rabbinic law and even midrashim. And for all those who have been turned away from conversions because of all the bigotry that exists in the religious world today, please know that from a Torah level, you are already part of Israel and are already an inheritor of all the blessings within our God's Torah. And please do not think I'm dumbing down the rabbinic process of conversion in any way, because I'm not. And I will even say that conversion is very, very important, because it's the only way for a society to properly gauge the potential ethical impact their group can have, in our case, by introducing Torah to a dying world. In other words, unlike the Almighty, who knows our hearts and our intentions, the only way for us to know who is a Jew is by adhering to some visual standard, i.e. a formal conversion process. In other words, there has to be standards, checks and balances on who we're going to legally consider part of Israel. But again, we must understand that this is in no way speaks for whom the Almighty considers a member of His covenant. So friends, we should really work towards eliminating all this Kabbalistic bigotry that has crept into the Jewish world, that has made proper legal conversion to Judaism virtually impossible in about 90% of the world today. It's really ridiculous. And for the record, friends, let me recap. I'm not in any way telling you to disregard ceremonial or ritualistic commands of the court. But like I said, that from a Torah perspective, we have to keep them 100%. But rather, that the court did not have the power or authority to establish or alter metaphysical reality. In other words, only because they would have voted that the Messiah would arrive in 2015 does not mean that it was meant to happen. Because if they could, I'm sure they would have prevented the temple from being destroyed or even any exile from ever happening. Not to mention that they never thought that their legends and folklore would ever be taken so seriously as they are today. Because they would have known that anything they would have said that was not from a halachic perspective would have been disposable, which was really the task of the great codifiers, the Rishonim, in Jewish history, all along, which was to what? To eliminate all the Agadah and Midrash from the text, so that we could finally know what we were commanded to do, to practice. And friends, if you're listening to me today and you're sick and tired of all the mess in your life, like a good friend once told me, it's time to bring this all to Hashem and take upon yourself His standards for living and know that your life will improve. For more information on everything Jewish, please visit bejewish.org or doordea.com. Thank you.